An Iranian F-14 locked its weapons on a lone American jet over the Persian Gulf. The targeting tone was solid, the missile was armed, the trigger was squeezed. And then something happened that no Iranian pilot, no Iranian radar operator, and no Iranian ground controller had any answer for. Something that turned a confident intercept mission into the most humiliating 14 minutes in the history of Iranian aviation. This is not a story about a dogfight. There was no dogfight. This is a story about what happens when a regime that has been telling its population for 40 years that it can stand up to American military power sends a jet to prove it, and discovers at close range, at speed, over open water, exactly how large the gap between that claim and reality actually is. The F-14 never fired a single weapon. The American aircraft it was sent to intercept never broke a sweat. And the Iranian pilot flew home listening to the Top Gun soundtrack through his own radio against his will for 40 miles. Here is exactly what happened. 14 hours ago, a single F-18 Super Hornet was flying over the Persian Gulf. No wingman, no escort, no formation, just one aircraft drifting closer to Iranian airspace than standard operating procedure would normally allow, separated from its carrier group in a way that looked, from the outside, like a navigational error, like someone had simply taken a wrong turn over open water and hadn't noticed yet. On Iranian radar screens, the contact appeared exactly as intended. One American jet, alone, slow, apparently unaware of anything around it. The Iranian radar operator stared at his display and could not believe what he was looking at. A lone American aircraft, gift-wrapped, sitting right there on his screen like an opportunity that comes along once in a career. Iran had been expecting a strike for weeks. Satellite imagery had been showing the same thing for days. Iranian forces burying nuclear sites under layers of concrete and compacted earth, hardening facilities against the kind of deep-penetrating munitions that American strike packages carry. The whole world could see it. The preparations were not subtle, and scared regimes that know something is coming and cannot stop it and cannot admit they are afraid, do not go quiet and wait. Scared regimes do something demonstrably stupid to prove to their population and to the world that they are not scared. On this particular morning, Iran was about to do something very stupid indeed. The commander who received the radar report made his decision quickly. One American jet, alone, over the Persian Gulf, drifting into range, intercept it, force it to turn around. If it refuses, shoot it down. Put it on state television, show the entire world that Iran will stand up to American air power in its own backyard. He picked up the phone and gave the order. Scramble the F-14. The F-14 Tomcat that Iran scrambled in response to that radar contact had been in Iranian service since 1979, the same year the Sony Walkman was released to the public. In American hands, the F-14 had been one of the most feared air superiority fighters ever built. Fast, powerful, carrying the AIM-54 Phoenix missile system that could engage targets at ranges that no other fighter-launched weapon could match. In Iranian hands in the present day, the F-14 was something considerably more complicated. Decades of sanctions, embargo, and international isolation had cut Iran off from the spare parts, maintenance support, and technical upgrades that keep complex military aircraft operational. What Iran had kept flying through those decades was the product of smuggled components, sourced through intermediaries, local improvisation that ranged from creative to alarming, and a maintenance culture that could only be described as operating on optimism as a primary engineering resource. The airframe was legendary, the condition it was in was a different question entirely. The Iranian pilot climbing into that cockpit was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the radar contact on his screen. One American jet, alone, slow, not maneuvering, not accelerating, not doing any of the things a pilot does when he knows a threat is coming. Just flying there, steady and apparently oblivious, like it had no idea what was approaching from behind. The pilot armed his systems. He checked his radar. The contact was clean, fat, sitting perfectly on his display at the kind of range where a missile shot is a formality rather than a challenge. He was already composing the version of this story he would tell for the rest of his life. The distance closed, 500 meters. 400. The targeting system confirmed the lock. A steady tone filled his helmet, the sound that means one thing and one thing only in a fighter cockpit. He had a kill shot. His thumb moved toward the trigger. He took a breath. He squeezed. Nothing happened. Not a misfire. Not a malfunction warning with a fault code he could troubleshoot and clear. Not a system error that a competent maintenance crew could diagnose and fix on the ground. Nothing. The tone was gone. The lock was gone. The radar return that had been sitting clean and perfect on his screen 1 second ago simply was not there anymore. He blinked. He looked again. Empty screen. He tried to reacquire the target. The radar searched, swept, found nothing. He switched modes. Still nothing. He tried his backup systems. His backup systems did not respond. His cockpit, which 30 seconds ago had felt like the command throne of someone about to make history, now felt like a broken car parked on the side of a road, with every warning light illuminated simultaneously and no manual in the glove compartment. He started hitting buttons. Nothing. He checked his systems panel. Error, error, error. He got back on the radio and told ground control his systems were down. Ground control told him to troubleshoot. He told ground control there was nothing left to troubleshoot. Everything was just gone. Not degraded, not partially functional, not operating in a reduced capacity that might get him home with limited capability. Gone. Ground control went quiet, because ground control did not have an answer for this. Nobody in Iran had an answer for this. The F-18 Super Hornet that had appeared on Iranian radar as a lone, separated, apparently vulnerable American aircraft was not a standard Super Hornet. It was an EA-18G Growler. From the outside, the Growler is visually identical to a standard F-18. Same airframe, same external shape, same radar cross-section, same signature on an enemy radar screen. Iran could not tell the difference from the ground or from the air. That was the entire point of the exercise. Because the EA-18G Growler is not a fighter aircraft in any conventional sense of the term, it carries weapons, technically, but that is not what it was built for, and that is not what it was doing over the Persian Gulf that morning. The Growler is an electronic warfare platform, the most capable airborne jamming system currently in operational service anywhere in the world. It can reach inside any aircraft's electronic architecture and destroy its functionality without firing a single conventional weapon. The Growler's jamming systems are powerful enough to affect even the most advanced American aircraft. Against a 1970s-era Iranian F-14 kept operational through smuggled parts and institutional optimism, it was not a contest in any meaningful sense of the word. The moment the F-14's radar went active and established a weapons lock, the Growler crew had everything they needed. The lock itself was the signal. The electromagnetic emission from the Iranian radar gave the Growler's systems a precise frequency, waveform, and location to work with. The crew did not panic. They did not maneuver defensively. They did not get on the radio and issue any kind of warning. They flipped a switch. Invisible energy, focused, calibrated, overwhelming, flooded the Iranian aircraft's electronic systems. What happened to the F-14 was not a malfunction in the traditional sense. A malfunction implies something broke and could theoretically be fixed. What happened was closer to someone walking up to a running computer and pulling every cable simultaneously out of the back. The avionics did not fail progressively. They simply ceased to function. Radar gone. Weapon systems gone. Navigation gone. Communications degraded to the point of near uselessness. The aircraft was still flying. The aerodynamics of a moving jet do not care about its electronics, but the pilot inside it had been reduced from a weapon system to a man sitting in a very fast metal tube with no meaningful control over anything except the basic mechanical inputs that kept the airframe pointed in approximately the right direction. The Iranian pilot did the only thing available to him. He turned around. He banked the F-14 away from the direction of the Growler and pointed it toward the Iranian coast, trying to cover the distance between his current position and the ground without losing the aircraft or his life in the process. He was no longer the hunter. He was a man trying to fly a broken machine home across open water, hoping that the basic mechanical systems keeping him airborne would hold long enough to reach land. He had lost. He understood that he had lost. What he did not yet fully understand was precisely how comprehensively he had lost, because that part of the story was just beginning. At altitude above the entire engagement, an F-35C had been watching everything unfold in real time from the moment the F-14 scrambled from its base. The F-35C is not an aircraft that announces itself. It does not appear on radar screens, does not generate the kind of electromagnetic signature that triggers warning systems, and does not occupy the visible spectrum in ways that allow a pilot in another aircraft to locate it by looking out his canopy. It had been there the entire time, tracking the F-14 from the moment of scramble, monitoring the Growler engagement in real time on its sensor displays, watching the Iranian pilot systems collapse with the clinical detachment of someone observing a process they have complete foreknowledge of. The F-35C pilot had watched the F-14 go active, watched the Growler respond, watched the Iranian jet's electronic architecture die on his display in the space of seconds. He gave it a moment, then he moved. The F-35C descended from altitude without the Iranian pilot having any indication it was coming. The Iranian was flying home, systems dead, trying to formulate a coherent explanation for ground control about what had just happened to him, focused entirely on the basic task of keeping a partially functional aircraft pointed toward the coast. Then he looked out his canopy. His stomach dropped through the floor of the cockpit. There was an American jet sitting on his wing, not approaching from a distance in a way that would have given him seconds of warning, not closing in on an intercept course that his radar would have shown him. Already there, steady, calm, matching his speed and altitude exactly, as if it had been flying in formation with him for the past 20 minutes and had simply neglected to introduce itself at the beginning of the flight. The Iranian pilot had never seen an F-35C at close range. Nobody outside of Allied air forces gets close to an F-35C. The aircraft that was sitting 3 meters off his wingtip had been designed from the beginning to be invisible to exactly the kind of radar systems he could no longer operate anyway. The F-35C pilot looked across the narrow gap between the two aircraft at the Iranian pilot. The Iranian pilot looked back. The American made no aggressive moves. The weapons bay remained closed, the F-35C's missiles sitting inside their internal bay, invisible, not displayed in the theatrical way that a less confident pilot might have chosen to communicate the power differential in this situation. He did not get on the radio and issue threats or demands. He did not make any of the gestures that military pilots use to communicate hostile intent. He simply raised 2 fingers, pointed them at his own eyes, then pointed them directly at the Iranian pilot. "I see you." That was the entire message. Delivered quietly, without drama, without any of the performance that the Iranian intercept mission had been designed to produce for state television. Just a statement of fact from someone who had been watching the entire engagement from a position the Iranian had never known existed. The Iranian pilot stared back across the gap. He had nothing. No radar, no missiles, no functioning systems, no response available to him, and no dignity remaining in the cockpit that he had climbed into an hour earlier, expecting to become a national hero. He shook his head. He flew on toward the coast in what he very much wanted to be silence. The silence of a man processing a comprehensive defeat in the privacy of his own cockpit, without an audience, without additional humiliation beyond what had already been delivered. He almost got it. The F-35C pilot waited until the Iranian was almost comfortable, almost breathing at a normal rate again, almost convinced that the worst of it was behind him, and that the remaining distance to the coast was going to pass without further incident. Then the American rolled. Not away, not upward, not in any direction that would have taken him out of the Iranian pilot's immediate awareness. He rolled around the F-14, a slow, deliberate, unhurried 360-degree barrel roll that took the F-35C completely around the Iranian aircraft and brought it back to exactly the same position on the wing where it had started, as if the maneuver had been performed purely for the aesthetic satisfaction of completing a perfect circle. The message required no translation. The F-14 could not respond, could not maneuver, could not do anything except continue flying in a straight line while an American aircraft performed aerobatics around it at close range purely to make a point. And then the radio crackled. The Iranian pilot assumed it was ground control. It was not ground control. It was USS Abraham Lincoln. And they were not transmitting a warning, a demand, or any form of official military communication. They were playing music. Kenny Loggins, Danger Zone, through his own radio on his own frequency inside his own cockpit at full volume. The Iranian pilot could not turn it off. He could not turn anything off. He flew the final 40 miles to the Iranian coast listening to the Top Gun soundtrack on an involuntary loop at full volume in a broken jet, escorted by an aircraft he could not see on any system he still had functioning. He landed. He climbed out of the cockpit. And somewhere on USS Abraham Lincoln, someone was having a very good morning. Leave one question in the comments. Do you think the Iranian pilot understood what hit him? Or did he land still convinced it was a malfunction? Every response gets read. Evidence first, analysis second. You decide what it means. Subscribe and turn on notifications. When Iranian aircraft attempt to intercept American jets again, when electronic warfare engagements like this one surface in open source reporting, and when the gap between what Iran claims its air force can do and what it actually can do becomes impossible to ignore, the analysis will be here.